Us like dinosaurs. Yeah, we like dinosaurs, don't we? I almost brought some of my little dinosaur figurines tonight, but I thought better of it. As a kid, I loved dinosaurs. We know a lot of kids. In fact, I have a neighbor across the street, a small boy that is in love with dinosaurs. We are fascinated with these creatures, these large reptiles, these things that we don't see today, although we have some creatures that might be similar to the dinosaurs, things like the crocodile, the alligator, some other type lizards that are out there. But dinosaurs largely capture our imagination, our fascination, and it seems to be kind of a throwback to a time that has long since been gone. Before I get into the dinosaurs, what did we talk about last night? What was our theme last night? Yeah, evolutionary hoaxes. And who can tell me what a hoax is? Yeah, it's a lie, it's a deception, it's a means used to deceive people. Now, we looked at several different areas. We looked at bad science, and we mentioned there is true science. Of course, the Bible and true science are in accord with one another. We've also looked at false science, and then there's such a thing as bad science as well. And we looked at the Miller experiment, trying to create a life from chemicals, things that are non-living, and what was the end result of that experiment that he did? Tar and carbolic acid primarily. He was able to produce a little bit of 2 amino acids, but remember, he left something out of his experiment. What was it? Oxygen. Because his whole experiment was trying to replicate early atmospheric conditions. We need oxygen, don't we? But he knew that oxygen would go after and attack those amino acids and would convert them into other things, so he left it out. So his experiment in no way proved that you can make life from something that is non-living. How many cases of spontaneous generation have been documented? Yeah, I can hold them up on my fingers. Actually, I can't. I have to make a 0 with it because there's no cases. And why is that? It doesn't exist. Spontaneous generation does not happen. We looked at the law of cause and effect several nights ago. We also looked at chimpanzee DNA as it relates to human DNA, and we're finding out that there are more and more differences. And something important to think about with DNA is not so much the similarity, but the differences. Do you recall about how many differences there were between the human genome and the chimpanzee? Upwards of 200 million. Now, those aren't just small changes, are they? Those are a lot of different things. And we saw that we actually share about 75% of our genes with the nematode worm. And we're not anywhere close to that kind of creature. What were some of the other things we discussed last night? Remember, we looked at some failed icons of evolution, the peppered moths. We looked at the idea of gene frequencies, that within a species things can change. We see that on a daily basis. Evolution tried to purport this as an evolutionary change in these moths, but we saw that the black-colored moth, the white or speckled-colored moth, both existed at the same time. It was just obvious that the Industrial Revolution that was happening at that point in time favored the black moth over the white moth. And we also looked at some failed icons, some more of that, Lucy and some of those others that were proved to be hoaxes. And what do we find so often that evolutionists do with a small piece of information, like, say, a tooth or a skull fragment? What do they create from it? Yeah, they create a whole story, a whole skeleton, all these different things to try and get people to believe in evolution. Well, do you think that's happened with the dinosaurs? Yeah, it's happened with the dinosaurs. And you might be asking yourself, why are we going to talk about the dinosaurs? Why spend a whole evening of our VBS looking at dinosaurs? And we'll get to that here a little bit later on. For those of you that may have not seen this slide, just for your awareness, these slides make me look a whole lot smarter than I am. And that's because a lot of that material is borrowed from the Apologetics Press Incorporated Teen and Adult Teacher's Manual, although I've added my own material in there and made these presentations. So I do have 2 new memory verses, or verses to mark in your Bible. Again, I hope you've been studying Job chapter 38 through 40 or 41. We're going to be looking at chapter 40 and verse 41 tonight. So if you have your Bibles, you might want to go ahead and crack them open to those passages. We may not get to those in this first session, but we assuredly will in the second. The first memory verse I have for you, or at least mark in your Bibles, is Job chapter 40 and verse 15. It says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox." So we're going to be looking at Behemoth and Leviathan, which incidentally in Job chapter 41, it is dedicated entirely to descriptions of Leviathan. So evidently God wanted to get a point across with him. The other one is Genesis chapter 1 and verse 24. This says, "And God said, Let the earth bring forth a living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind, and it was so." You might be asking, well, why did I pick this verse? Well, what do you think of when you think of creeping things? Snakes, okay. That word actually has a reptile slant to it. It talks about creatures that can move. They're mobile on land. But it actually has reference to reptiles if you look at the Hebrew word underneath it. So would dinosaurs be included in that word? What do you think? Yeah, they're reptiles. And what do we know about what day the land creatures were created on? I know the kids downstairs can tell us. What day was it? Day 6. Who else was created on day 6? Man was. What does evolution purport about humans and dinosaurs? What do they say? They never existed together, did they? There were a long period of time between them. We can see in just the first chapter of the Bible that dinosaurs and humans had to exist with one another. In fact, probably created on the same day. We know there are some sea dinosaurs, so they would have been created on day 5. What about the dinosaurs? And they are the poster children of evolution. So as I mentioned, what is so important about them that it warrants a full night of our VBS studies? Well, the answer again is quite simple. They are the poster children for the theory of evolution. When you crack open a book about evolution, what's probably going to be on the pages? What's going to be on the cover of that book? Probably a dinosaur or a dinosaur fossil. This may be hard to see in the back, but I'll make sure you can understand it as I'll go ahead and speak it to you. In the once widely used 100-page middle school science textbook. So we're talking about middle school. We're talking about the preteen type age, certainly impressionable years. This was called Evolution, Change Over Time. It was published by Prentice Hall. There are attempts that are made in this book to establish evolution as a fact using a variety of alleged proofs. Now, one piece of evidence that appears on nearly 1 out of every 3 pages, so that's 1/3 of the pages, has something about dinosaurs on them. Remember, this is only a 100-page book, so we have 33 roughly pages dedicated to dinosaurs. The first 2 chapters in this 3-chapter textbook begin with pictures and texts about dinosaurs. In several sections of the book where they're not talking about dinosaurs, guess what the students are asked to participate in reading and writing about? Dinosaurs. So the few pages they don't have on dinosaurs, you're doing activities about dinosaurs. You think they're trying to get something across? The authors and the editors of this so-called science textbook, which incidentally used to be used throughout the United States, they've been tempted to indoctrinate young minds with the truths of evolution by using dinosaurs. And that question is going to come up. Why do you suppose dinosaurs are used by evolution so frequently? Be thinking about that answer. Inarguably, these dinosaurs are the sugar stick. They like to hold on to it, that evolutionists do to capture the attention of the young and the old alike. Again, a number of you raised your hands about liking dinosaurs. They're interesting creatures. So what does history, science, and the Bible as well have to tell us about the dinosaurs? So, if dinosaurs and humans once walked the earth together, it is logical to conclude that humans, which we know are intelligent creatures, would have left behind some evidence about this. Again, is it not that we can pick up a book or we can look at a painting and see evidence of creatures that humans have about them? Well, what do we have now today? What does everybody have? Got one of these, which incidentally I'm supposed to put up here. What do we do with that cell phone? We take pictures, don't we? And what do we take pictures of? Sometimes our pets, sometimes beautiful creatures that we see out in nature. Well, what did people do prior to the invention of cameras? They wrote things down, they painted it, they inscribed it in things. So ancient civilizations had ways of documenting the things that they saw, that they heard. So you would expect this type of evidence to exist. Also, we tell stories today, don't we? We tell them to our kids. We like to hear stories. Well, do you think people would tell stories about dinosaurs if they lived together? They lived at the same time? Well, you should have seen the T-Rex I saw yesterday. We would tell stories about them. Now, do we have evidence for the cohabitation of dinosaurs and humans? That is, that they existed at the same time. Do we have these proofs? And that's what we want to look at tonight. So let's look at the first one, stories about dinosaurs. There are a wide variety of stories of reptiles that have been passed down from multiple cultures all over the world. Now, why is that important? Why is it important that it's not just isolated to a particular culture? What do you think? Well, yeah, it's worldwide. It's not unique. It's not just this one little group or cult making something up. This is a worldwide phenomenon. In fact, the famed, you want to call him that, 20th century evolutionist Carl Sagan noted the implacable mutual hostility between man and dragon is not a Western anomaly, that is, in these here United States. It is a worldwide phenomenon. What's he saying? They're all over the world. You can find these stories. Militant evolutionist and LiveScience.com staff writer Kurt Than admitted dragons are found in the myths and legends of cultures all around the world. You might be saying, why are you talking about dragons? I thought this was about dinosaurs. What's more, and we'll get to that, many of these creatures sound exactly like dinosaurs or dinosaur-like, that is, marine or flying type reptiles. But again, they're not called dinosaurs in these stories, but rather dragons. Now, who wants to take a guess as to why that is? Why would they be called dragons instead of dinosaurs, do you suppose? Yeah, we're going to get to that. Exactly right. That term didn't exist, so how are you going to describe a creature with a term that doesn't exist? Well, they use a term that does exist. Do you find the word dragon in the Bible? Yes, you do. Now, it has a variety of meanings attached to it, but some of those meanings can certainly be related to reptiles. And to your point, Robert, the term dinosaur was actually not coined until the early 1840s, so it's a fairly young term, isn't it? Dinosaur is a compound Greek word. Dinos equals fearfully great, sauros, lizard or reptile. So what would be the definition of dinosaur? A fearfully great reptile. That's what that word means. Those stories told previously of fearfully great reptiles would not have included the word dinosaur prior to the invention of the term. Instead, the name dragon was attached. Now, I put a picture up here of a dragon. Anybody know what this is? Yeah, a Komodo dragon. Does he still exist today? Absolutely he does. And we attach the word dragon. Well, what is he? He's a large reptile, a large lizard, exactly right, and we still use that term. Now this one's interesting. How many of you have heard of Dracorex before? This was a fairly recent fossil that was found. In 2003, so I guess it's been about 15 years ago, a nearly complete dinosaur skull, that's this right up at the top here, was excavated in the Hell Creek Formation in South Dakota. Now, for those of you that can see this, what does that look like to you at first glance? A dead chicken? Okay. Besides a dead chicken, what else does it look like? I wasn't expecting a dead chicken. That's a good one. That looks like a dragon skull, doesn't it? We see pictures. How many of you have seen The Hobbit before, the movie? Yeah, we remember Smaug, that dragon. It kind of looks like him, does it? What we would think, a long snout, horns. It kind of has a long approach to it there, a look to it. And that long, knobby, spiky skull appeared so similar to descriptions that we have in paintings of certain quote-unquote legendary dragons. It was actually named Dracorex, which means Dragon King. Now, the Children's Museum of Indianapolis is who has this skull. So if you ever want to take a trip, that's where it's at. They referred to it as a new type of dinosaur, and here it comes, that is 66 million years old and looks like a dragon. Now, there's your description. The display at the Children's Museum next to this image read, when we saw this creature's head, we weren't sure what kind of dinosaur it was. Its spiky horns, bumps, and long muzzle looked more like a dragon. And what you see down here is actually a replica of what they think it looked like. So again, they made this whole replica of this dinosaur with just that one fossil. So as I was mentioning, there's some imagination going on there as well. People will fabricate things from time to time. We asked the question, a dinosaur that looks more like a dragon. It's interesting, isn't it? Evolutionist Mark Norrell admitted that all the mythical creatures have real underpinnings in biology. We asked the question, what real animals prompted the dragon legends that we have? Well, dinosaurs seem to be a good fit, don't they? What rational explanation? Remember, we're thinking logically. We're thinking rationally. We're asking the question, what is more reasonable? What rational explanation exists for why people in, again, different places, different times, separated by thousands of miles, all came up with stories of giant reptiles that sound more like extinct dinosaurs than anything else that we have on the earth? Again, answer that question in your mind. Why does history record the existence of large reptilian creatures with serpentine necks? We have a picture of one here. Elongated bodies, enormous tails, hard skin. You've heard of dragon skin, impenetrable with spears, stout legs, spiked backs. They have the knobby heads like what they found on that skull. Certainly terrible teeth, snake-like tongues, horned or crest heads, sharp claws, and membranous wings, all things that we would use to describe a dragon, but also could be used to describe a dinosaur that we have seen as far as the fossils go. Why are the physical characteristics of dragons so similar to the anatomy of various dinosaurs? In fact, so much so that the Latin word for dragon, which is Draco, that's where they get Dracorex from, would be used to designate a very specific type of dinosaur. Well, the answer seems to be because many dragon legends are simply the accounts of people either seeing or interacting with dinosaurs. Well, let's conclude this. Have some elements of dragon legends been embellished over time? What do you think? Yeah, they have. Do we ever embellish anything? From time to time you think about, well, you should have seen the fish I caught. It was this big. Well, in reality, it may have been a little minnow. We think about the kid that was chased by a dog. How big was that dog that chased that kid when you hear the story? He was huge. He had big teeth. You find out it was a little chihuahua. But we embellish things from time to time. Well, that could certainly have happened with these various dragon legends. Especially, we imagine what dinosaurs look like, the elements and the visual things that we see of them. Can you imagine seeing one face to face? You might exaggerate some things about it too from time to time. But such inaccuracies don't negate the overall truth that reptiles of many different shapes and sizes once existed along with humans. They lived with them. And think about this. Do we have an abundance of dinosaur fossils that we can go to and we can see and that scientists are looking at and piecing together? Do we have fossils? We do. Well, where did those fossils come from? Did somebody just crank up a fossil factory and say, well, I'm just going to fabricate all these things and we're just going to go plant them in the earth and hope somebody finds them over enough period of time? Who would do that? Who would have time to do that? But we have evidence for these giant fossils, these creatures that don't exist today. They're too big in some cases. Well, let's talk about illustrations for a little while. So we talked about stories. We know that stories do exist. Perhaps you've even read some. I think about Lord of the Ring, The Hobbit. Those are stories, are they not? Yeah, they're in the fiction realm, but they talks about dragons. You can trace that stuff back. a little bit farther, but let's see, are there pictures, are there illustrations, drawings of these things? More compelling than the stories that have been passed down about these creatures are the illustrations that were drawn long before people even knew about dinosaurs, or that term really was coined. That is, dinosaurs, once they became extinct, there'd be a period of time when humans weren't interacting with them. So consider 3 examples from 3 different continents. Again, this is important. We're going across different places in the world now with these examples, so they're not isolated to just one place. Now there is a petroglyph on the underside of the 3rd largest natural bridge. Here's a picture of it right here. This is called Kachina Bridge, and it's in Natural Bridges National Monument just west of Blanding, Utah. So if you want to go to Utah, that bridge is there. And there are several petroglyphs, which a petroglyph is simply a rock carving. So it is an image carved on a rock. And there's also pictograms or graphs. These are a pictorial symbol for a word or a phrase. So instead of saying a word, they'll have a picture for it. Think about Pictionary. Rock art experts believe these things to be anywhere from 500 to 1,500 years old. So that's the time frame. Now, when was that word dinosaur invented? Remember? Yeah, the 1840s. So these things precede that. Now, the carvings are thought to be the work of the Anasazi Indians who once lived in this area. And they didn't just carve dinosaurs. There's pictures of mountain goats, a human figurine, handprints, and many other carvings and drawings are quite easily seen underneath this bridge on both sides of the span. So if you go on this side, you can see them. If you go on the opposite side, you can see them. Here's one of the more interesting ones. There is a petroglyph of a dinosaur. Again, I don't know how easy this is to see in the back, but here is his head. He's got a long neck, he's got a shorter body, and a real long tail. Well, what kind of dinosaur does that look like? We call him the long neck. We think about a brontosaurus or an apatosaurus. And over here is a picture of a man. Isn't that interesting? There's a man and a dinosaur in this petroglyph. And any unbiased visitor that would come and would look at this would have to believe this thing looked like an apatosaurus, or also is more popularly known as a brontosaurus. So what is so special about this dinosaur carving that we want to draw attention to? Again, what does evolutionists say about dinosaurs and humans? Yeah, they were separated by long periods of time. Dinosaurs went extinct, and then humans, a fairly young race in comparison. But here we have a picture of a man and a picture of a dinosaur carved into this rock. Interestingly enough, 2 distinguished rock art experts. So these aren't novices in their field. These are people that go out and examine these. They are good at what they do. They've written about this petroglyph, and neither one of them have suggested that it is a forgery. Now, we know in today's day and age, things can be forged. People can fabricate things, but neither one of them suggested that. Francis Barnes, an evolutionist and widely recognized authority on rock art, so this guy believes in evolution. He observed in 1979, there is a petroglyph in Natural Bridges National Monument that bears a startling resemblance to a dinosaur, specifically a brontosaurus with long tail and neck, small head and all. So he admitted it looks like a dinosaur. Again, up in that upper left-hand corner, we had a carving of a human being. Well, these dinosaur petroglyphs, that are here at least, show every sign of age. One can be sure that if there were a way to explain this away, to try and get it to fit with evolution, don't you think they would have attempted to do that? Don't you think they would have said, aha, we have a good proof for evolution? But they haven't done it. Now there's another thing, a rock carving in Cambodia. Now in AD 1186, King Jayavarman VII built a temple near modern-day Phnom Penh to honor his mother. Now, for those of you that are mothers here, how would you like to have your son build you a nice big old temple? Now, there's your Mother's Day gift, right? This guy built his mother a beautiful temple. He had beautiful stone statues, carvings to decorate the walls and the columns. This temple was known as Ta Prohm. Ornate carvings of monkeys, of deer, of lizards, of parrots, swan, water buffalo, or just some of the animals depicted. So he has all sorts of different animals, beautiful, ornate statues. One particular 10-foot column in the temple is located right about here, has a carving over here, and I'll have a bigger picture of this in the next slide, of a dinosaur. Now, who can tell me what that dinosaur looks like? What kind of dinosaur is that? I give you the clue in the slide. It's a stegosaurus. Remember the one that has the plates on its back, the vertical plates that stand up? It looks like a stegosaurus. So why is a stegosaurus carving in an old temple such a remarkable thing? Well, this temple was built more than 600 years before they learned about dinosaurs from the fossil record. More than 600 years. So where did you get the information from? What do you think? How would you know what a stegosaurus looks like? Either seen one or he was told one. There was something that was passed down to him through the various generations. So here's a better picture of it. Hopefully you can see it better. So here is the carving of stegosaurus. Here is one that somebody recreated in a dinosaur park, which I think this is actually overseas. And then here is a skeletal structure of one. So you can see it's a unique dinosaur that has these plates. And as I remember it in my dinosaur history, those plates were kind of used to warm the animal up. We know reptiles do what often in the sun? Are they hot-blooded or cold-blooded? Yeah, a lot are cold-blooded, so what do they do in the sun? They warm themselves up. My understanding of the stegosaurus, that's what scientists believe those plates were used for. They talk about a solar-powered dinosaur. You got it right there. But it's striking the resemblance that you have. Now, how many of you have heard of the Ica burial stones before? Now, I was reading about these. There's a fair amount of controversy on them. There are those that are skeptics and some evolutionists that are saying these are forgeries. But they've actually been able to find them, as I understand it, in different locations too. So again, any evidence that's presented is going to be attacked, isn't it? Whether it's on the evolution side or the creation side. In this particular case, Dr. Cabrera came into possession of his first burial stone from the Ica section of the country of Peru. So we're in Peru at this point in time. And he was given one as a paperweight for his birthday. So there you go, a birthday present. Here's you a paperweight. He tried to find the origin of his gift, and eventually he gathered over 11,000 of these stones. And they turned out to be ancient burial stones that the Indians had placed with their dead. So they had put them with the various dead that they had. Almost 1/3 of the stones, so out of 11,000 we're dealing with 1/3, fair over 3,000 stones, depicted specific types of dinosaurs, Triceratops, Stegosaurus being some of them, and some of the pterosaurs. You think about pterosaurs, things like pterodactyls, the flying type dinosaurs. And this type of art form represented by these stones and their location dated them about 500 to 1500 AD. We're dealing with the time period in the past. Now, how could these ancient Indians have known how to draw these creatures if they had seen them or had never seen them firsthand or had them described? Again, remember, they didn't have the fossil record like we have today. But where did they get this idea? And you think about it. If these are forgeries, 11,000 of the stones that have been found, there may be more out there. Somebody is really wanting to forge something, aren't they? Spending a lot of time doing that. We talked about the creationists. What are we trying to set forth? Truth or falsehood? We're trying to set forth truth. We don't have time to carve stones to set forth stuff to try and prove something. But people will believe that. Well, let's conclude this section. How can we account for all of these ancient artifacts which seem to point to human and dinosaur interaction at some point in time? How can we do it? Yeah, a very rational answer is the fact that humans existed at the same time as dinosaurs. And you know what? The answer is very plain if you open your Bible. God made dinosaurs the same time as He made man. We're going to look at dinosaurs and the Bible. Before I do that, any questions? Any comments? Don't be bashful. Just raise your hand. Here we go. I just found proof. There's a dinosaur and there's people with it. We found the missing link. No, that's the Jurassic Park ride at Disney World, I think, or Orlando Studios, or whatever it is. Although evolutionists are quick to discount anything that the Bible has to say about the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs, anyone who claims to be a Christian, which I would hope that would be the majority of us here, and thus we accept the Bible as inspired of God, as infallible, we trust in it, we have to accept whatever information is found in the Bible to be accurate. In regard to the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs, many modern-day Bible believers either have rejected what the Bible has to say on the subject, or they haven't really given it a whole lot of thought in light of various Bible passages. Again, we're going to look at a few of those in the book of Job. Now, according to the Scriptures, and this was one of your key verses earlier in the week, the whole of God's earthly creation was done in 6 24-hour days. And we're going to have more to say about those 24-hour days tomorrow. Exodus 20 and verse 11, a great summation of the creation account, says, "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is." Would that include dinosaurs? Yeah. What does that leave out? That's all of God's creation, isn't it? "And rested the 7th day, wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Incidentally, I just have to point out, that resting doesn't mean God was tired. He just ceased from His creation. Now, in Exodus 20 and verse 11, as we mentioned, it simply summarizes the creation account of Genesis chapter 1, wherein the reader learns what was created on each day of creation. In fact, that's what the children downstairs have been learning. They've been learning about what is created on each day. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, we find out that all animal life, whether sea creatures, land animals, or flying creatures, were created on what days? Here's your quiz. What days were the sea creatures created? 5. Day 5, day 5. God made birds and fish alive, right? And then what about dinosaurs, land creatures? Day 6, that's right. And we know man was created the same day. So dinosaurs at most would be 1 whole day older than man. That is, those that would be sea creatures, or perhaps even the flying ones. But let's look at Genesis chapter 1. We'll start in verse 20. "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind." Remember the law of biogenesis? "And every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good." Now, I'm going to pause there. What do you suppose that term whale, I know it's plural there, means? What is the definition behind that word? Sea creature? Anybody else have another idea? Fish? Okay. Do you remember in the account of Jonah, what was he swallowed by? I hear fish and I hear whale. Why do you say both? I thought a whale was a mammal and a fish was a fish. Why do we say fish and why do we say whale? There's some multiple meanings there, isn't it? And don't ask me which one he was swallowed by. Because if you go to Jonah, you can make a case for a fish, and if you go to the New Testament in Christ, you can make a case for a whale. In fact, in the Hebrew and in the Greek, you can make a case for both, because they're both in there. And in a lot of cases, people at that point in time, science wasn't quite as advanced as what we have today. They called things that lived in the water fish, sea creatures. And we've come to find out recently, dolphins, whales, they're mammals. They breathe air just like we do. But that term, whale, means a sea monster. It could actually have reference to a reptile that lives in the water. And isn't that interesting? It would be created on day 5. So keep that in mind. When you see words in our English Bible, the King James, version, there's another language underneath that, isn't it, that it's translated from. We can go to the various good dictionaries. Strong's is a good one for Hebrews, and Thayer's a good one for Greek. Do you have a question? Absolutely. That would be a sea creature, and it's certainly a fish. A shark certainly can. Great white, very, very large. In fact, there's such a thing as a whale shark, which is kind of like, wow. You get both terms there. So yeah, that could happen. It could have been a whale shark. Truth is, we don't know. We know it was a miraculous event in Jonah's case either way. But yes, it could definitely fit into that particular word. Again, we think about a sea monster or a sea creature. A shark would fit with that. Good question. Any other question? I like this interaction. Let's look at verse 23. In the evening and the morning were the 5th day. So that was the 5th day. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth, there's our word, creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good. So when you think of creepy things, we think of creepy, crawly things, we oftentimes think of bugs, don't we? Insects. But again, it's talking about things that can move on the land, and again, kind of has a reptile slant. If you look at the original Hebrew, God saw these things and saw that they were good. We also learn that God made the first humans, Adam and Eve, on day 6. So let's pick up in verse 26. And God said, let us make man in our image. So right away, what do we know about man? We're made in the image of God. We're different from all of his other creations. After our likeness, he says, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. I left out verse 28 on here, but who can tell me what verse 28 says? What was the command given to man? Be fruitful and multiply. What was he to do with the earth? Remember, there's an S word used. Subdue it. What does that word mean? Subdue the earth. Yeah, bring it under control. Is that not what science is? Science is simply obeisance to God's command to man in verse 28. Have you ever considered that? And think about the harm that false science is causing today. But that's really what it's about. And God placed man above all of his other creations, didn't he? As far as the creatures, he was to have power over them, be able to subdue them. Now we'll pick up in verse 31. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. So, 6th day, we find out the creeping things, the land animals, were created on the same day as man. Thus, if all land animals, and we know the sea animals, were created on day 5, and humans were created on day 6, then what is the obvious conclusion? They lived at the same time. Again, the dinosaurs at most would have been 1 day older than man. I'm probably going to save this as we're getting close on time. In fact, I think we're about there. Be thinking about why isn't the word dinosaur used in the Bible? And you probably already have that question answered as we've looked at the term. But we're going to look at the fact that there are a couple creatures that sound very similar to dinosaurs, and they are found in the Bible. But for right now, I'm going to turn you loose so you can be like dinosaurs on those cookies downstairs. Thank you. Ma'am, please take your seat. Please take your seat. I can do that. She's my wife. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Who ate the most cookies? How many did you have? You only had 3. Who can beat 3? You had 5? How big were they? This dude's got some serious sugar. 5 cookies, all right. We'll see if that can be beaten tomorrow night. 5 is the record. Anybody eat more than that in one sitting so far? Your cookie was that big. Good cookie cake. All right. 5 is the current high. When we were talking about dinosaurs and the Bible, we want to ask a question. Why isn't the word dinosaur found in the Bible? Again, you'll go through your English translation of the Bible and you type into your search engine or eSword, if you have it, dinosaur, guess what it's going to come up with? It doesn't exist. It's not there. That fact doesn't negate that dinosaurs once coexisted on the earth with man. We have to keep in mind that the Bible is not a taxonomical book. Now, what we simply mean by that is the Bible doesn't include every single animal or creature that God created. In fact, what is the main purpose of the Bible? The main theme of it. Yeah, Jesus. Salvation of mankind, the redemption of mankind. So, obviously, it's not a book to document all of the different creatures created. The Bible, however, does mention a variety of animals. We know it mentions snakes, chickens, horses, goats. We think of the ox, cattle, things of that, but not every creature. And simply because it does not mention an animal does not mean that the Bible teaches that that animal never existed alongside with humans. In fact, we already looked at Genesis chapter 1, didn't we, to say that all of these different creatures had to exist along with man. It implies that. In fact, there are many animals the Bible never specifically mentions, things like kangaroos, elephants, anteaters. My personal favorite, the duck-billed platypus we got up here. Now, I got to talk about the platypus a little bit. If I were an evolutionist and I was looking for the transitional link, I would use the duck-billed platypus. Here we have a creature that has a bill like a duck, a body and a tail like a beaver. He's got webbed feet like an otter. He's got little eyes. Incidentally, he lays eggs, but he's a mammal, so he's kind of reptilian in that regard. And the males have a venomous stinger on the back, like on their back legs. If I was going to find the transitional element, or I was trying to find it in evolution, wouldn't you use this guy? They actually found DNA in him that's consistent with some of the bird chromosomes, some reptiles, some others, so they're looking at him like, maybe he's the missing link. But guess what the platypus gives birth to? More platypus. Incidentally, the plural of platypus is platypus. Platyply or platypuses, however you want to say that, isn't actually a word. But think about that. And yet we don't really hear a whole lot about them. In fact, I was reading an article about them, and the first people that encountered them actually thought it was a hoax, and they picked it up and they were looking for sew marks on the bill because they thought somebody had sewed this little bill on this creature. So that's your lesson on platypus tonight. To say that these animals do not cohabit the earth with man because the Bible does not mention them is a false statement, a false premise. To assume dinosaurs and humans never lived together on earth because the Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs would be equally erroneous. We have to remember that the Bible was completed 1900 years ago, was translated into English around 1535 by Miles Coverdale. The English word dinosaur, again, was not coined. It wasn't created until 1842. So that's more than 300 years after the first complete English translation of both the Old and the New Testament. Again, we wouldn't expect to find that term in our English Bible that was created before the term was coined. Although most modern English Bible translations have elected to omit it. So we talk about the New King James Version. Anybody tell me when that one came out? Or at least the rough time frame? Yeah, you got the exact one. So that word would be invented, but they still have elected not to use the word dinosaur. In fact, I was looking at a variety of translations of Job chapter 40 and 41, which we're going to get to, and you know what translators use for behemoth and leviathan? Take a guess. Behemoth and leviathan. NIV's got it, which we know is not an accurate translation. New King James has it. American Standard has it. Of course, King James has it. They use the same term. Again, such exclusion of the term dinosaur in the Bible doesn't mean, again, that they didn't exist. Now let's look at these two animals that God describes to Job in his second speech. So turn in your Bibles to Job chapter 40. I'm going to do that with you on my phone. I do have some of these verses up here in the slides, but I did not include all of them, or you would have the wall of text effect. Well, let's look first at behemoth. So you find behemoth in Job chapter 40, and it begins in verse 15. I'd like to read this for you. It says, "Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Lo now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar, the sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass, his bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow, the willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river and hasteth not. He trusteth that he could draw up Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes. His nose pierceth through with snares." What does this creature sound like? What are some of the descriptions that God, remember this is God speaking to Job, that he uses? Well, we see he has strong bones. How are his bones described? What kind of metals are used? You think of brass, iron. Remember, he's not saying his bones are brass or are iron. That "as" is a key word, isn't it? It's like those things. They're very strong. Well, some of those dinosaur fossils we found, how big are those bones? They're massive. They're very large, would be very strong. But we think about his tail. His tail is described as doing what in verse 17? Moveth like a cedar tree. How many of you have seen a cedar tree before? That's a pretty good sized tree, isn't it? His tail moves like that. Also, the behemoth was chief of the way of gods. He was very high up on the list of the creatures. We'll be thinking about what this description might actually be describing as far as animals go. Well, let's turn to Job 41. And as I mentioned earlier, Job 41 is dedicated entirely to Leviathan. So there in Job chapter 41, God uses 34 verses as we have it in the King James Version to describe this creature. I'm not going to read all of that for sake of time. I do want to point out some of the key features about Leviathan. He had mighty power. He had an extremely strong neck. He had terrible teeth all around. Are you getting a visual image of what he might be like? He had tightly joined rows of scales that were virtually impenetrable. In fact, what does it mention about air in the scales? Find that verse for you. Yeah, they're close together, so much so that they were airtight. Not even air could get in. So we're talking about scales that are very close together. He had a jagged underside that left pointed marks on the ground when he laid down on the ground. But here's a very impressive ability that he has as we look toward the latter parts. He had the ability to expel sparks of fire from its mouth and smoke from its nose. Let's pick up in verse 18 of Job 41. By his sneezings, that simply means his sneezings, a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. He has a fiery, bright eye. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron, so we can imagine a bubbling cauldron emitting smoke from it. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. How many creatures today do we have that would fit that description? Robert and I were talking about, there's some creatures that have some amazing abilities, but we think about this, and that's not just the only thing that he has, is it? Again, he has mighty power, a strong neck, terrible teeth, impenetrable scales. So right away, with scales, we know he has to be some kind of either fish-like creature or a reptile-type creature. So there are only three possible explanations we could have for these two creatures that we examined in Job chapter 40 and 41. The first is that they're unreal, mythological creatures or monsters. Now right away, why would we discount that? What do we have in the context of Job, really starting in Job 38, going through Job 41? What other creatures does God describe there? What's one of them? And you can look in your Bibles. This is, after all, Vacation Bible School. What are some of the creatures? Simple things. Wild goats. Well, do we have goats in existence today? Yeah, absolutely. What else? Yeah, a unicorn. Well, that sounds kind of mythical. What do you think the unicorn was referring to? Yeah, probably a rhinoceros known for its long horn. We see the wild donkey is there in Job 39 and verse 5. I believe the horse is mentioned as well. Other creatures that we know are in existence today, don't we? It would seem very strange to be talking about real creatures and shift gear to a mythological creature and shift away from that to a real creature again. Well, another possible explanation is that they are real animals that exist somewhere in the world today. Now remember what we said about Behemoth. A very strong creature. He has bones as of brass, as of iron, a tail like a cedar, not afraid of water. The Jordan River mentioned there. What kind of creature do you think he sounds like? What's perhaps an explanation of a creature that you've heard people said is Behemoth? Yeah, I've heard people say it was a hippopotamus. Now let's think about a hippopotamus. Does he have bones as of brass and as of iron? Maybe. We could maybe see that. Is he able to hide under the trees, get shade from the trees, not be afraid of the water? In fact, where do hippopotami actually live? Well, they live in the water. Well, what about the hippopotamus is a bit different from the description we see of the behemoth? Yeah, does his tail move like a cedar? Yeah, it moves more like a little fly swatter, doesn't it? It's small, it's pretty tiny. We wouldn't, if we were describing it, we wouldn't really describe that as a cedar, would we? So it doesn't quite fit all of them. But people have purported, well, maybe it's talking about the hippopotamus. And then here's the third that we could look at, that they are some kind of real yet extinct creatures like dinosaurs. Now, what have you heard Leviathan referenced to? Crocodile. I've heard a crocodile, and that would seem to fit except for what? Yeah. How many fire-breathing crocodiles have you ran into? Or smoke that comes out of their nostrils? Yeah, and then some will use figurative language as well. So you see, there's different descriptions. So I'm not telling you which one to believe. I'm just saying, of these three, these are really all you get. Either it's a mythical creature, never existed any point in time, it's a real animal that does exist still today, or it is some kind of real animal that went extinct, like a dinosaur. What do you think about these two creatures? Sound more like a dinosaur. Well, let's conclude. So again, and you answer this question yourself. Again, I'm not going to say one way or the other. But what explanation of those three makes the most sense to you regarding Behemoth and Leviathan? And really, regardless of how you answer that question, we do have worldwide stories, as we looked at. We do have illustrations, and certainly we have fossils of creatures that no longer exist today, that we call dinosaurs. As such, God had to have created them on the same day as man, not millions or billions of years prior, as evolution teaches. And if we can poke a hole in one of evolution's tenets, we can prove it false. So, it's time for some discussion questions. Explain how dinosaurs have been used to teach the general theory of evolution. How are they used to teach it? What do you think? Remember what? Robert? Yeah, time, right? They're shown as these ancient creatures that existed well before man, well before other intelligent type beings such as man. What else? What do you think? Well, that's a good explanation, so we'll go on to this one. Why do you think dinosaurs are icons of evolution? Why do you think they've really grabbed onto the dinosaur? Because they're extinct? Okay. Anybody think of another reason? Exactly. They appeal to kids. I couldn't think of a better explanation. They appeal to children. Why is that so important? Why is it important to appeal to children? That's right. Children are impressionable, aren't they? I can't help but think of this quote from William Ross Wallace, his poem, "The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world." What is he talking about in that poem? If you get children, you get the world eventually. Because guess who's going to be the next generation of people? And what do you suppose they're going to teach their children and perpetual generations? Same thing. Do you remember back in the time of the judges? We have Joshua got the children of Israel into the promised land. And throughout his time frame, while he was alive, what were the children of Israel like? Were they obedient to God or were they disobedient to God? They were obedient. What happened when Joshua died? Well, that generation that was with him stayed faithful. What happened to those children, that second generation? Judges 2 and verse 10 tells us, "And also that generation, that is that generation that was with Joshua, were gathered unto their fathers," and look at this, "and there arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel." Why did that happen? Why did not that generation know the Lord? That's right. They taught them not the ways of God. Do you think Satan understands the importance of getting the children? And does that highlight the importance that we need to have as adults, as parents, as grandparents, to teach our children the truth? Exactly why we are here tonight and they're downstairs learning about the truth of God's creation. Are they going to get that in secular schools? They're not. They're absolutely not. Well, I can think of no better reason that evolution wants to use dinosaurs than that. Because again, what kid doesn't have at least some fascination with dinosaurs? And again, adults do too. So, a next question. If dinosaurs and humans once walked the earth together, what types of evidence would we expect to find that humans would have left? Stories and illustrations. Exactly right. What does the Bible have to say about dinosaurs? What's the first thing? Yeah, we have a couple creatures that may be dinosaurs, but what do we know about all of God's creation? Yeah, they were made in 6 literal 24-hour days, man being created on day 6. So again, Behemoth and Leviathan, they seem to be pointing to dinosaurs or perhaps dinosaur-like creatures. And then, as we mentioned, the Scripture implies that they were created either day 5 if they were sea-based or day 6 if they were land-based. Again, man being created on day 6. So let's discuss the animals that God described in Job chapter 40 and verse 41. Behemoth. Again, what were some of the features of Behemoth? Tail like a cedar, moveth like a cedar. What about his bones? Yeah, strong bones, like as brass, like as iron. Scales. Yeah, he eats grass like an ox. So perhaps he may be like one of those Brontosaurus dinosaurs or Apatosaurus dinosaurs, with the long necks, long bodies, long tails. Certainly that tail could move like a cedar, couldn't it? It would have massive bones. In fact, as I understand it, as they find the fossils, they're actually finding out that these creatures actually walked kind of on what we would imagine kind of our fingers or like the knuckles of our fingers. And what you find out with that structure and how it twists, it's able to support a tremendous amount of weight. So it's an engineering marvel, really, when you think about it. And they're finding that out from the fossil record. You imagine an animal of that size would be exceptionally heavy. But we know he was strong, too. It talks about strong navel, strong belly type muscles. This was a strong creature. And he was also the chief of the ways of God. How many of you would like to see a behemoth? I'd love to see one. I'd love to know this is him, the chief of the way of God. And when I think about a hippopotamus, I really don't think of the chief of the way of God. When you think about chief of the ways of God. But I won't discount it. Leviathan, Job 41. What do we learn about him? He's a little more intimidating creature, isn't he? What does he have? He's got chompers, doesn't he? Terrible teeth. What can he do out of his mouth? Fire, nostrils, scales. We'll give some examples of ancient artwork of dinosaurs or dinosaur-like animals. What was one of the first ones we looked at? It was on that natural bridge. What was that? Yeah, it was like a Apatosaurus, Brontosaurus, a petroglyph. It was a carving on a rock. What else? Remember that ancient temple? There was a carving of a Stegosaurus, temple carvings. And then finally we had the Ica burial stone. Quite a few of those, over 3,000 of those that had dinosaurs on them. So you ought to know this one. Explain why the term dinosaur was not used when the ancients talked about large terrestrial, aquatic, or flying reptiles. Why didn't they say, I saw a dinosaur? Yeah, the word wasn't invented yet. It's hard to use a word that you don't know yet. And then in 1842, what have some evolutionists stated about dragon legends? Remember we quoted a couple of them. What did they say about them? It was a worldwide phenomenon. You remember that? It occurs all over the world amongst different civilizations. Perhaps civilizations that weren't even communicating with one another. And yet we see similar type stories appearing. Remember, they also said that mythical creatures have foundations in real creatures. Again, we think about the unicorn as we view it, a horse with a horn coming out of its head. Well, where did that get started? Somebody imagined, I wonder what a horse with a horn sticking out of its forehead would look like. Or what about Pegasus? What is that? Well, that's a horse that has wings. We think about a griffin. It's a combination of several animals, isn't it? Is it reasonable to conclude that dragon legends are stories of man's actual interaction with dinosaurs? Why or why not? Is that a reasonable thing to conclude? What do you think? God created everything. It's reasonable. It's reasonable that at some point man had to interact with some type of large lizard to get this type of information. And again, because it's so widespread, it can't just be one person or even culture coming up with it. Exactly. That's exactly. Yeah, historical record. Absolutely, that's a wonderful point. There is history of it. Somebody else have a hand up here? Absolutely. There you go. That's right. They're all over the place, aren't they? Yeah. So again, what rational explanation do we have for all of that? Man's imagination just clicked across all those different cultures? Or are they interacting with something, some creature that perhaps doesn't exist today anymore? Certainly not the size that we see in the fossil record. Good answers. So let's conclude this as we are rapidly running out of time. Evolutionists link dinosaurs with the concept of an old Earth, which is an idea that stands at odds with the Bible. In fact, how many of you have seen a similar type chart? It lists, the Cretaceous period, the Jurassic, the Triassic, all those different periods, and these dinosaurs lived here, these lived there, and eventually they became extinct, and there's a vast amount of time as that thing spiraled. Evolution, remember this, evolution requires, it has to have a lot of time, because as they purport, evolution takes a lot of time. So tomorrow we're going to punch a massive hole in the time element for evolutionists. But it's been proven that dinosaurs, thought by evolutionists to have lived millions of years before humans, actually lived contemporaneously with humans, which again, if we can prove one tenet of evolution false, we have the whole theory false. The Bible teaches us that God created everything in 6 days, which would include dinosaurs. Again, tomorrow, we're going to look at that creation account a little more closely as far as the time frame. Tomorrow night, we're going to look at creation in 6 days or 6 billion years. I hope you're looking forward to that. Seems hard to believe we're almost at the conclusion here. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments before we go ahead and let the children come in? Where are they now? There are several theories about that. What's one of the theories that you've heard about the extinction of dinosaurs? Ice Age? What's another one? A pretty famous one. Flood? Well, the flood would certainly be a good one, wouldn't it? With the preservation of fossils that we have, I think you could make a case for the flood and wiping out a number. What's the big thing that came crashing into the earth that people say? Yeah, that meteor, that asteroid. What's the big problem with that? Would that just kill off the dinosaurs? Well, they again think the dinosaurs were kind of just living by themselves, or humans weren't there, or we were later to come on, but it would kill a lot of organisms. They say that dust cloud would cover up the sun, plants couldn't grow, eventually they couldn't eat, they would starve to death, they would die. I think the flood presents an interesting case. What also took place after the flood as far as the world goes? We have atmospheric change, where things a little bit different. Climate was different, and so that certainly may have contributed to that.
The only problem with the flood, though, is
that petroglyph was in Utah. Yeah. Yeah, so... Right. Sure. So you would definitely have it killing some, and maybe some particular species of them, but who's to say they weren't on the ark? In fact, probably were. So interesting things to think about. Well, I see the kids are chomping at the bit to come in here. So I appreciate all of you tonight so very much, your thoughts and comments especially. I hope you make plans to come back tomorrow. Thank you.